for all the people out there with a dream that just want to be seen. Yeah, my dream's bigger than the average.
Welcome to episode 13 of the Be Seen podcast. Today, we have the pleasure and privilege of having Jonboy Meyers, Marvel and DC comic book creator, as well as an animator and video game artist and designer. Jonboy, thank you
what's up?
On the podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me, man. Super excited to be here. Always great to talk with other creatives and kind of share whatever knowledge I have about industry and breaking in or whatever. So,
Jonboy, please share with us your journey. It's a very compelling story of where you are today.
I started making my own comic books when I was around 4, and did it with a lot of my neighborhood friends. My dad was a military policeman, and he would on a military base in Colorado. And usually when soldiers get in trouble with the law on base, they're arrested, but they're thrown in the junk tank usually to just dry out. And then their CO or commanding officer would deal with them in the morning. They would release them to their CO. So to pass the time, if you get in trouble on a Friday night, get thrown in the tank, you're in there till Monday. They would bring comic books from the local BX, which is Base Exchange. They're like 7-Elevens or Circle K or whatever you guys have over there, where you can buy magazines or drinks or whatever. They would bring magazines and comics for the soldiers to read to pass the time. And when his shift was over, my dad would always bring those comics home for us. So I would tear into them, and mostly be war comics or things like that, like Weird War Tales, GI Robot, Creature Commandos, Unknown Soldier was stuff that I read on the regular. Weird War Tales was my favorite, though. I used to love reading those because it was sci-fi kind of war stories, but they had a fantastic element where there were monsters or creatures or robots in it. I thought it was always pretty interesting. And then we started making our own comics in the neighborhood. And then one day my dad brought home a Captain America comic. And prior to this, I was not really aware that Captain America or Spider-Man I thought it was just a cartoon thing, really, because when you're a stupid kid, you see it on TV, like, oh, that's cool. But when you read it in comic book format, it's totally different. And it just kind of blew my hair back. And we started making comics, then all neighborhood kids. We started making more comics together, and we did superheroes. We would write and draw our own, then we'd sell them for like a quarter to try to buy more comics, and we'd spend like weeks on it to sell it for a quarter to somebody. We just end up putting it on their fridge or throwing it away, of course, just so we could buy more comics. And I've kind of been on that road ever since, kind of writing and drawing and telling my own stories, so that's kind of it in the nutshell as far as how I started out. So that's how it started. Now how it's going is, flash forward, I've been doing comics professionally now for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Worked for Marvel, DC, Boom, just about every major publisher out there I've worked for. There are some exceptions for some indie titles, but pretty much all the big ones I've worked for. Worked in games, worked for Blizzard, worked for Riot Games, worked for Sony, a couple of small studios here and there, done some stuff for animation, worked for Cartoon Network, Marvel Entertainment. Yeah, I think the thing about it is when you chase your passions and dreams, this whole world that you kind of grew up loving kind of opens up to you. So, and I'm always a big proponent of if you can dream it and you can dedicate yourself to it, you can do it. Because if I can get in, I think anybody can get in. I think the main thing for them is, how serious are you about your craft and how bad do you want it, Because I think in life, you're at least schools in the US, you're not really taught to critically think. You're taught to be a worker, a drone. You're not really taught to question things and ask and do things. They try to beat independence out of you. So, for me, I was always kind of on our artistic end and always asking questions, always wanting to know things. And I think for me, that path kind of led me to, of course, starting my own business and being my own business person and making my own decisions, doing the things that I want to do, kind of have a little bit more control of my own fate instead of having it in the hands of an employer or whatever. Not to say that there's anything wrong with working an employer. I think for me, it's just my own decision of things that I think are right for me. So
I believe, was it Riot Games where you came across Todd McFarlane?
Yeah, so I was working in comics, and then I got recruited to go into games full time. So I was at Riot Games for almost, I think, 2 years or something like that. maybe 2.5 years. It was a blast. It was a ride. It was a lot of ups and downs. I learned a lot. And I decided that, being at Riot was probably not that at the time, was probably not the place I wanted to stay, because there's always challenges. And I think for me, it's always about like, are you happy doing what you're doing? And if you're not, and you want to do something else, well, go do that. So DC had approached me about going back into comics, and they knew that I really love Teen Titans, so they kind of dangled that carrot in front of me. So I was like, oh, cool, yeah, I'll leave, and maybe I'll go back into comics. And during that same time, I went to San Diego Comic-Con. I ran into Todd McFarlane, had a really nice conversation with him and his wife for about 10-15 minutes. Gave him a sketchbook. I thought that was it. And then a couple of weeks later, he gave me a call and offered me a job on Spawn. I'm just like, yes, of course. Like, honestly, like, to work with people you have a great amount of respect for, and then on a title that I've always drawn Spawn even in my free time. So I was like, oh, of course, like, this would be great. And I let DC know, like, hey, I'm actually gonna work on this thing for Todd drawing Spawn. Like, yes, go do that. So I did that for, I think, 2 years, and then I bounced back over to DC where they're doing this Rebirth thing, and then they offered me Teen Titans again, which was a learning experience. I must say, I learned a lot working on that book, and I learned a lot about how comic books get made now versus how they used to get made back then. Because I think when I disappeared in games for about 2 years, then went back into comics, I worked for Todd, which we had absolute creative freedom pretty much to do anything we wanted to, as long as Todd was kind of our filter. He would be like, yes, no, or maybe. And then going back to a whole editorial team where they're kind of telling you exactly kind of what they needed, it was night and day. It was not the same thing. It was a humbling experience, but an educational one. So yeah, it was interesting. I've had a lot of interesting jobs. Very, very lucky, very fortunate. So
Definitely. In terms of when you were saying like how comic books were made,
right.
back in the day, maybe when you was a young boy growing up, you said you was creating them from 4 years old. How different is it creating back then to creating now?
They were more team driven. Like nowadays, working in comics is like working on a bag of Doritos. It's a brand, so it's very from on top. They'll approach creators and say, well, we have this idea, something like, hey, what are your ideas? You'll pitch your ideas, or they'll say, well, we have this idea that we want you to do. And it's a very specific idea of what they have in mind for you to do. And it's kind of like, for me, what it kind of boiled down to is, kind of being a power tool in the hands of somebody else, telling you what to draw or how to draw it or what they want the story to be. And for me, I'm more about the team environment where you have a writer, an artist, and an editor formulate their own ideas for these characters and what they want them to go and do, and their journey, the hero's journey, for whatever we want them to experience. And that stuff more along the long lines of stuff that I'm interested in, because those are the things where you make a mark on a book. Usually when things are kind of a little bit more corporate, they're always, at the end of the day, Batman will always stay Batman. He won't change. Like, he'll still be the same. At the end of the story, nothing else changes. Maybe somebody dies, Batman's like, oh, I'm sad for 2 seconds, and he moves on. This type of stories I like to do, where characters change, and they're changed forever. Like, he was a jerk, now he's not a jerk, or he learned how to be a better partner or a better teammate, or I learned something, or I lost a finger. There's got to be a price to being a hero. There has to be that hero's journey. Hero's journey for me is there's a sense of loss. There's a sense of growth. There's an initial change in the story that turns the hero's world on its head. He comes in and he learns something about himself. These are stories more along the lines of the stories that I like to work on and be a part of, where it's very top down. It's hard for me to turn my brain off and say, yes, I'm okay with that, because I'm a comic fan myself. Reading these characters, we have our own ideas of what we want these characters to do and be, because we love them so much. And not to say that the corporate people, like the X company who owns these characters, doesn't love these characters. It's just they have their own agendas, their own things that they want to achieve. And the thing you have to ask yourself when you're working on these jobs is, are our goals aligned? And if they're not, don't take those jobs. You're going to be miserable. I understand we all have to take those jobs that we got to pay the bills, but it's just like there are other jobs out there that you can do. You got to ask, like, is the direction something I want to do? Is this something that I feel true for me that I want to say about these characters? Because whatever happens in that book, you're going to be forever linked to. So take, for example, if you're part of the creative team that made Captain America Nazi, guess what? That's going to follow you your entire career. People are going to ask you, like, yeah, I really hate what you did with Cap. And you never, and if you're okay with that, then you're okay with that. But for me, Cap is, that would never happen, ever. No way. Captain America would never become a Nazi, no matter what, and I think we talk about value system, and who you are at your core kind of aligned yourself to the type of jobs and work that you want to do for yourself as a person. So you never be afraid to turn down something, even if it's a great opportunity. You got to make sure it's a right opportunity for you, because if it's a right opportunity just to get your foot in the door, but you're going to be basically just a power tool in the hands of a writer or an editor, like, man, okay, what fun is that? Like, I just better off be telling my own stories and doing my own comics. The thing is, when you get projects that come along your plate, do they align with your creative goals and aspirations? Is that something that you'd be interested in doing? Does that click the boxes for you? Because for me, if it doesn't, you're not going to get the best work out of me, and I'm not going to want to do that project, because it's just like, I'm not the type to set up for, wow, this is okay. No, fuck it. I want this to be great. I want this to be amazing. I want people to be excited about it because I want to be excited about it. And when I'm excited about it, it's going to show on the page. People are going to read it. They're going to be excited about it. And if I'm not into it, it's like, you know what, man, like, hey, this is not for me. And they ask why, and tell them why. Like, look, I don't like your story. I think it's dumb. Yeah, maybe not be that honest, because you might not get more work, but I think, you can just say, this is not the type of story I want to tell about this character. I would like to work with a writer and an editor, and we come up with our own stories and ideas for this character, and there are compromises in that. But at the end of the day, are you really getting to say what you want about that character? Because if not, then you're just kind of like one of these guys who kind of just do whatever people tells them to do. And I'm not that type of creative. I'm a creative who likes to leave my mark on something, not for an ego sense. It's just because I love these characters. Like, if I'm doing a story about Darth Vader, I want to do a story about Darth Vader that informs everyone who I feel like maybe he's not such a bad guy. And maybe there's a Star Wars story that we tell for Darth Vader where even as Darth Vader, he actually does the right thing. You know what I'm saying? People are complex, and these characters in these fictional worlds are complex people, and they're flawed people. There's no saying as straight up good and straight up bad. There are shades of gray in between, and every character has a moral code. And the thing about what makes characters believable characters is we see ourselves in those characters. That's how we internalize it. That's what creates that emotional investment. That's what creates that passion. This is what keeps readers coming back. And if you're losing readers, and you got to ask yourself, maybe we're not doing it right. Maybe we're empowering the wrong people. Maybe we're not being authentic with our stories. You always have to ask yourself these questions. So for me, I think you always got to consider who you are, what type of person you are, and whatever type of person is okay. You have to determine who you are at your core and take those jobs accordingly. So if not, you're just going to be miserable. And life's too short, man. Life is, you're not going to get out alive. We're all going to die at some point. So what are you going to do with that time that you're here? What type of projects do you want to work on? What type of good and great things do you want to put out into the world that you're passionate about and proud of? Look, there's always work somewhere else. If I'm not working for a publisher, I can do commissions. I can put out my own things on crowd funds. There's always a way in your hustle to make money to support yourself. There's always a way. And I guess I would say this, there's always a way, as long as you believe that there's a way for you. Whether you can or can't, you're right. And that war is always fought within your own head. And you can't be your own worst enemy. You have to be your own best friend. You have to be your own cheerleader, and you have to keep pushing yourself on. Because if you're not working hard, I can guarantee you there's somebody else out there who's working harder and better than you are. And for me, fuck that. I do not want somebody beating me. I do not want somebody telling the stories that I want to tell. Because once that story's out there, guess what, dude? You waited too long. You didn't tell that story. Guess what? Someone else did. Now you got to change yours, because that's where its story's been done. You don't want to be accused of taking someone else's story. The thing about it is like, but that's a good thing about being a creative. We're like Doritos, just make more, make something even better, or put something new out there. Don't feel like you have to limit yourself, and don't feel like you have to feel like you arrived. Like there was such intense pressure for us when we all first broke in like 20 years ago. You know, like we have to conform so much. And the thing about it is, no, man, just be great. Do what you do and do it well. Tell the best stories, do the best art. Sooner or later, people will come around your thinking and they'll be like, hey, man, you know what? We like what you did on this. We want you to do that here with our thing. I'm like, well, you know, it depends. Are you going to let me do what I want to do? And if they say yes, I'm like, oh, great, cool. Okay, let's have a conversation and go from there. But if not, you always reserve the right to say no. No is the most powerful thing you have for yourself as a creative, to say, do I want to take certain jobs or not? Again, you always have to go back to like, look, don't be dazzled by money. Like money comes and money goes. It's more about creating a good foundation for yourself and for your work. Like, think about that in terms of that. Like, what do you want to do? What is it going to be? Like, what is that project? Is it going to be me working for a publisher and working on Spider-Man and making my mark? Or is it just I create my own thing and just make it so awesome that I don't have to work on anything else if I don't want to? And that those are the things you have to ask yourself: is what type of creator do you want to be? Who are you at the end of the day? Are you a creator, or are you just an artist? And there's no right answer for that. The only right answer is what's the right answer for you. Because I can guarantee you, I started out as an artist, but the more I did and the more work I did, I found out I wanted to become a creator, because I also wanted to write and draw stories that were personal and meant something to me. I'm not interested in telling a story where, you know, the hero at the end of the day remains the same. You know, it's like, how boring is that? Like, oh, hey, nothing happens. Superman saves the world again. Oh, and guess what? Everyone's safe. Tune in next week. There's no stakes. And for me, I want stakes. I want things to matter, you know? So, yeah.
Definitely. There's a couple of wonderful things you said there. You said about when you're talking about the hero's journey, you made reference to seeing ourselves in characters. But if you break down the archetypes, they're parts of our psyche. You know, the hero, there is an element to us which is a hero. There's an element which is a trickster. There's these different areas to us. And also, as well, what I wanted to ask you is, it's, you know, it feels in the comic book world, yeah, that the legends are cemented. You know, for instance, you've got Spider-Man, you've got Batman, you've got Superman, and we can keep going on. We know who the legends are. Is there room for a new legend? Is there room for someone we've never seen?
Yeah, I think so. The thing about what makes every creator unique is your lens of how you see and filter the world. And that means that you can create a character like Spider-Man, who's kind of like Spider-Man, but your own thing, because it's all through your own lens. And the things that you create through your own lens is completely unique to you. Now, you don't want him to look like Spider-Man, of course not, but you can tell your own stories. So it's like in your mind, you're writing fan fiction Spider-Man stories, and it's your own book that you completely own. I think the problem right now is this whole concept that's rampaging through fandom is multiverse. And I think it's such a bullshit cheat. And I'll tell you why: because characters are unique. The moment you start saying there are a million Spider-Mans in a million different universes and they're all going to get together, you're telling me there's really nobody unique. And it's just kind of like you're kind of homogenizing it at that point. There's no, like, Peter Parker in this universe is completely different from this character or this character, this character. But the more you homogenize this, you kind of make everything feel generic. And I think the tool of every writer or creator or artist is to make things feel unique and their own thing. You know, and I think it's kind of this crutch that we're all relying on, that it's just like, well, they like this one thing, so we're going to give them a million of the same thing. Like you have Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Man, you know, Spider-Miles, you have Spider-Gwen, you have all these things are cool. But then you're opening up this greater universe, and it's just like, oh man, guys, enough already. Like fucking a million Batman over here, a million Superman. It's just like, at some point, nothing matters because there's so many of these heroes. It's like, well, what are the stakes now? And everything's a cosmic stake now. So the thing is, how many people understand cosmic stakes at this point. Like, okay, Endgame boiled down to depopulation. He wants to make the world, the whole universe sustainable. Okay, got that. That makes sense. But these other stakes, we have all these millions of different heroes doing these millions of different things, of cosmic higher things, of like securing the universe from what? I think it's these big grander ideas, but at the same point, you kind of lose the human element in it for me. And for me, it's just like, where's the human emotional core to this? What business does Spider-Man or Daredevil have in outer space to stop Thanos? To be honest with you, let's be real. How the fuck does that make sense? And how does that matter? It really doesn't, because like Daredevil does Daredevil's best work on the street level. He's there for the common man. He's there to make sure that kids read their people can live in a safe community and reach potential. Spider-Man, he never wants to see loved ones get killed or things like that. It's not everything works on a grand scale, and I think we're too grand sometimes in our thinking, where we need to boil it back down and get back to basics. I think, but that's what you can do when you create your own characters. When you ask me, there's room for this. Of course, there's room for it, because if people are telling all these other stupid grand multiverse stories, which are getting ridiculous because everyone's doing it at this point, where it's almost a joke, right? Do the exact opposite. That's how you be successful. You see what everyone else is doing and do the exact opposite, because you're like, you know what, there's a void here. And I can tell stories where it's a Spider-Man type character dealing with the fact that, oh shit, I'm going to school, I'm a student, my aunt is on fixed income, and fuck, I got to pay the rent and pay for tuition. How the hell am I going to do that? That's something that's real and identifiable, that pretty much every student can identify with. Because if you're young, we've all been broke. We've all had to eat ramen noodles and cans of tuna and rice just to survive, or live off of hard-boiled eggs. I mean, we've all had to do that. So, I think it's keeping things relatable, and as grand as your world is, remember to kind of keep your world relatable and small to a certain point. Because if things get too grand, I feel like these ideas just kind of go over people's heads. You're just like, why should I care about this? Okay, it's like, if you're in this big group of characters, like you with the Scarlet Witch and Doctor Strange and Iron Man, and you're like fucking Daredevil with a billy club, and you got radar sense, like, oh man, like, well, what are you gonna do, man? Really? Come on. It's like, okay, well, let's keep things in perspective here. Like, how would you make a character like that relevant? And you could tell those stories and really come up with a cool story where you could do that, where Daredevil in space helping fight Thanos could be more relevant. It'd be a challenge, but I think it's better set to put Daredevil in his element, where he thrives the best, where he's like, hey, I'm a lawyer by day and I help people, and at night I kick people's ass who do wrong. Like that. That's pretty simple. That's Daredevil. That's Spider-Man too. I'm a student by day, I'm just a kid trying to get by, and at night, I'm trying to fight crime, just try to make a difference. That's it. That's the end of the day. And I think these are concepts that people can kind of wrap themselves around. I think characters like Captain America and everything, I think they're more leaders or more rallying points. I can understand, like, okay, Captain America in space, probably a leadership role, strategic. Okay, that makes sense. Iron Man, yeah, technology, okay. Like Spider-Man, I don't know, man. Want to go around webbing things? Like, is that really going to stop Thanos, who can like basically lift a moon? Is webbing my hands really gonna stop me? I don't think so, man. Like, let's be real here. So, yeah, I get it. These are comic book stories. They're meant to entertain and defy disbelief. But I think there's a certain grounding in reality that we have to do, because there's a difference between who your audience is too. I think if you're writing for little kids, you want to keep things simple because they can only understand basic concepts. But I think with adults, things have to kind of ring true. And if it doesn't, you're like, man, this story's kind of bullshit, because it really falls apart for me. Like, why? It's like, it doesn't feel believable. Like, well, the superheroes in space, none of it's believable. But at the same time, when you project yourselves onto these characters that you love, like, I wouldn't do that. Someone told me, Daredevil, let's go into space, I'd be like, I'm good, man. I'm gonna keep watch here on Earth. I'll make sure Earth's safe. You go fight that menace, because, like, what am I gonna do? Like, really? Am I throw my billy club and use my radar sense to be like, come on, man, let's be real, So I think there has to be a certain amount of believability to your stories, and that's something that's lacking. So again, you could tell your own stories and and fill that void. There's always those things. You got to know your market and what's out there. And if things are missing, give people what they're missing. They'll love you for it.
I love that. I
Yeah.
love that. That's
Yeah.
so true. Do you feel they say that in terms of films, they say
Sure.
the book is always better than the film? Okay, that's what many people have said. Do
Right.
you feel that the comic books are better than the comic book films?
Um, the new ones, yes, definitely. A lot of the new movies I've seen lately, they're really severely lacking in story, and I think it's just churning out product to be product. The thing about it is, audience are much more savvy about story and narrative now without even knowing it, because you have things like streaming and binging where people can get a full scope of the story. So instead of a 2 hour movie, you're watching a 10-hour movie where there's a lot more character development, and you expect more out of these heroes now. You expect more, like, well, that's not believable. Like, oh, that's kind of bullshit. Like, you know, because you expect more story. You expect to see more of yourself in these characters because you're telling stories that humanize these characters a little bit more, make them more relatable. So I think books generally are better than the movies, because when you're telling a movie, first you have all these people throwing in their own ideas that don't exist in the book. And then you have to grasp onto certain concepts, because certain concepts, inner monologue does not translate always so well to movies sometimes. I think it works well in certain movies, and I think you can incorporate it in, but you have to pick your direction on that and how you're going to tell the story. Because if there's a lot of inner monologue in a book, how do you translate to a movie unless you work that in? And if your producers or studios don't want that, and then they have a vehicle for, like, well, it's a DiCaprio thing, and we don't want you to cover his face, and you're like, well, it's Spider-Man. Like, yeah, but still it's DiCaprio. We want to see him a lot. There's all these micro compromises that you make. It's kind of like flying a plane and you want to go to Hawaii for vacation, and that plane starts off and it's 1 degree off. So by the time you get your destination flying from the UK to Hawaii, if your plane is 1 degree off, you're not going to end up in Hawaii. You're going to end up in the middle of the ocean, or you're going to end up in South America or something like that. That 1 degree ends up pulling you completely off course. And this is why sometimes we see movies end up being the train wrecks they are, because there's so many different opinions and decisions being made that pulls that thing so far off course. So, yeah, those are the innate challenges of adaptations. But for every film that doesn't do it right, there are films that do. I think a lot of the Marvel films up until Endgame were pretty much home runs. The early ones, they were still finding their ways. There's still kind of a cornball-y, kind of cheesy element to it, which was fine. I think it was reflective of the times, but I think people are more sophisticated now and they demand more. So that's the challenge. It's just like, how do you do that? That means you have to simplify your idea and your story. If people know, like, Ant-Man Quantumania, what this is, and you throw too much in there, or things are too lofty, or it's out of character for all the other Ant-Man movies, people are going to rally against that, because in their mind they identify with Scott Lang, and Scott Lang does something that is not Scott Lang to us. We're gonna be like, this is bullshit. Scott would never do that. Why would he do that? You know what I mean?
It's almost as if there's parameters, there's laws to, certain characters, certain worlds.
Well, the thing is you can break rules, but there has to be an event that makes a character break the rule, his own rules. It's like Batman killing somebody. Would he kill somebody? Absolutely. What are the circumstances? Like, he's going to kill Alfred, and Alfred loses an arm instead of losing his head, but he saves Alfred. You see what I'm saying here? Like,
Yeah.
there has to be workarounds for all those things. But that's the challenge about writing stories. Again, at the end of the day, when you're doing stuff, is, I guess, when we boil down the conversation, it's more about authenticity.
Yeah.
Like, are these characters true, or the work I'm doing feels right for me? Is the story that I'm writing feel right for me? Is this job that I'm doing, is this right for me? Do I really enjoy this, or am I just doing this because it pays me lots of money? And look, money is a great tool to buy freedom and happiness, but if you're miserable making money, like, who wants to be around somebody who's miserable all the time? You're going to make everybody else around you miserable. You're probably not happy to be with at home. kind of happy to be with at work. These things have repercussions through your life. And I guess what we're talking about really is authenticity in the core of whatever story this is, whether it's our story, our true life story, or the fictitious characters. It's the same thing. We know when things are wrong. It's a matter of whether or not we do something about it. I mean, we always pass that sniff test of like, that movie was not very good. For whatever, like Wakanda Forever. I didn't like it, man. Best thing about it was Angela Bassett, and they killed her, and I was like, man, that's so wrong. She was the best part about that whole movie. Everything else does not feel very authentic to me. It felt forced. It felt contrived, and it felt like this to me. I felt like they're telling us this is the best we could do. And I'm like, you know what? You could have done so much better. It could have been so much more. It could have been a much better movie than it was. I just felt like I don't know. It didn't check the boxes for me on so many scales. Where the first movie was just like great. I was like, oh, I'm totally in on this. Like, yeah, So,
What do you think it lacked? What would you have done differently?
Well, I think they should have just recast T'Challa, because I think that's what the Boseman family wanted. They didn't think Chadwick was not the Black Panther. It was one character he played and played very well, but he was an amazing actor. And to say that he was an embodiment of one character, I think was doing a disservice in my opinion, to Chadwick. I think Chadwick would have wanted that to continue because he loved that character. I think the way they set everything up, it felt like you have two groups of people who chose to segregate themselves from the world and then wondered why the world did not like them. And they did everything you could to continue to piss off the world around them. And for me, that didn't feel very authentic to me. And I think, the characters did not feel. The only authentic character for me was Angela Bassett, and maybe the other character played by Denny, the lady from Walking Dead. I felt like she had a really good authentic performance, and everything else kind of felt like it just, I don't know, it didn't really gel for me, man. I just was like, the epicness, this huge battle takes place on a boat with people in the water, and it just felt wrong. It's like, where's the scale on this? Okay, like, all right. I just felt like, I don't know. They didn't have to fight in the first place either. And I think Namor, when he first did what he did, his approach was very confrontational right off the get-go, where he met the characters, and that's royalty addressing royalty does not start off with disrespect. It's always about respect and about aligning, similar goals and things like that. And it was conflict for conflict's sake. And to me, it's just kind of like it was pretty dumb. And I didn't like Julia Dreyfus's character at all. Like, there's no big picture character. I think the biggest picture character was Angela Bassett, and they killed her. She should have been the one to pick up the mantle and fought to bring peace and do all this stuff. And I just felt like there was a lot of missteps in the narrative. But you have to understand, this is a big budget movie. I think, Chadwick's passing caught everybody off guard, and they still wanted to go into production because millions of dollars in pre-production were already spent and they're ready to go. So they got to kind of patch that ship best they can. So I think, considering the circumstances, they did the best they could, given the circumstances. But I just think, as far as the characters and narratives, I just felt like, for me, it let me down. It really, really did. I think Riri should not have even been in the movie at all. Like, that whole trip was totally, you cut her out and just made this machine that does this would have been just perfectly fine. Inducing another character's sake for that sake, it took away from Shuri, like, more about her journey and story. Because the thing is, I just felt like you know, if you have a character who idolized her brother the way she did, and she probably didn't want to be the Black Panther because in her eyes her brother is still here and he is the Black Panther. And I think there's that emotional core of her taking up the mantle not for herself but to honor her brother and to do what is right because the country needs the Black Panther, and making it more about that as a rallying point to unite our people, to embrace the world around us and work with the world around us. You know, there's a way to work around it responsibly instead of, you know, because T'Challa, even his father wanted to share their gifts with the world, and now all of a sudden, now that they're gone, they're like, well, we're not going to share now, and they're fuck you to the world and whatever, and that was it. I think there could have been a better way to handle that. You know, a lot of missteps. But again, you're kind of patching holes. So I mean, it's tough, man. Like Thor: Love and Thunder too. Like huge missteps. Like everything was too jokey, so nobody took anything seriously, and it was kind of like there's an inauthentic feel to that where Thor was really struggling, and it just would have been better just to humanize him, to see him cry and just feel like, you know, I've lost everything and now I'm losing this woman I love and I don't know how to handle it. And instead of making a joke about it and trying to puff himself up and pretend like everything's great and I'm the strongest, and it's just kind of like, well, you know, like
We're covering over the vulnerabilities which attract us to those characters. That's what
right,
we fall in love with.
right.
And you know, something for you as well. Okay, out of the Marvel films, what's the last Marvel film, or not even Marvel? I'm talking, you know, translated from comic book to screen. Okay, so a superhero or comic book story. What is the last one that you was like, wow? Not like this is good. I'm talking like, wow, this is blowing me away.
I would say Skyfall was probably the last great franchise thing that I thought was really like well done. And then the Last of Us episode part 3 with Nick Overman playing the gay character, like that, honestly, very authentic portrayal of just two people kind of lost in this crazy world who find each other and take care of each other through all this crazy stuff. Like those are the type of stories that really move you and make you feel something. Like these characters change throughout the arc of the story and they choose to die together. Like, you know, he wants to die with the people he loves because he goes, my whole point of being was to protect you. That's why I'm here. I understand that. And even in Skyfall, you get to see how James Bond actually became James Bond, and he's James Bond without the gadgets, without all this stuff. You know, it's his character's story arc where he's really just like he's a man on the run, just trying to figure it out. You know, and I think you strip these characters down to their bare bones, and it's like getting by your wits. It's a lot more. It's a lot more identifiable because how many people have gone through these hard times where they've given up everything in pursuit of a goal, and they've given up comfort and things like that in order to become something greater or to fight against something or to stand for something. Like these are things, these are concepts as people, as I feel like we would all rally around, because that's stuff that innately we all want to be the hero of our own story. We all want to save people to a certain extent. We all want to be the hero. We all want to do the right thing, and we see ourselves in these characters. And when these characters kind of act, it just when you're involved in these characters and you interact with them, in your mind it creates a blueprint. And then when these characters don't act like their blueprints, you're like, there's something inauthentic about it. It's kind of like the Star Wars movies, the newer ones, where we knew exactly who Luke Skywalker and Han Solo and all these characters were. And then when they brought them back in the big screen, there's a nothing felt authentic about those characters other than the people who played them. They weren't really acting. They were very bitter. They were very negative. It just everyone was just jaded, and it was just kind of like we projected in our own minds what these character stories were and how things ended for them. And the fact that they ended so badly was just like the hero didn't get a happy ending. And to me, these are characters that we've enjoyed and played and pretended to be as kids and children and playing. It's a huge disservice. I think it's kind of like a big fuck you to fandom. You know, it's like, all right. So
You know what, as well, right?
so I feel like we're old men rallying against it, but I think it's more about being authentic in the things that you do, right? Yeah.
No, 100%. What I was going to add to that is how much further can we keep going with rebooting the same character, man? Do you know?
Well, yeah, yeah. I think we're having that same problem in comic books where everything's a new number one, and we always roll back. I think every 10 years we should do a mild reboot of characters for a new audience because social times change. I get that, but I think a new number one every 2 or 3 years is kind of ridiculous. But I think it again that's more of a Hollywood thing because actors' salaries or budgets get out of whack or people's feelings get hurt and they don't want to work with that production company anymore or whatever. I'm sure it's really strange, petty things that cause a lot of these reboots because they think, well, we'll just start fresh and do this. I mean, the perfect example is the DC universe. They've kind of mildly rebooted how many times, and with James Gunn taking over, the Flash is supposed to officially reboot everything. So, um,
But
yeah, I think people are sick of it. I think, yeah.
it's like, for instance, okay, so you take, right, when I was growing up, and it goes even further back than this, take on screen, Batman was Michael Keaton, okay?
All right.
After Michael Keaton, I believe,
Christian Bale, right? Yeah.
no.
Oh, George Clooney and
No, he comes later on. I believe that it might be Val Kilmer.
right, it was
Michael
Val. Yeah,
Keaton, Val Kilmer, George Clooney.
right.
Then, I'll be honest, I love Christopher Nolan's take on it. I was always very, not trapped in the past, but you're loyal to what you kind of grew up with. I was like, Keaton's Batman, right? Val
He's
Kilmer.
back. Yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I mean? He was the man. But I'll be honest, the best one for me is Christian Bale. That's just my personal opinion. Then you have, is it Patterson, Ben
Right.
Affleck? Come on, man. How much more of this can we keep doing? What I'm saying is sometimes I'm just talking screen. I know comic book issues and different versions, and it's beautiful work. It's beautiful. Let it go on. How much longer can it go on screen?
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I think Ben Affleck for me is the best Batman.
Yeah.
I think personally, like whatever you want to say about the Snyder movies, they're very flawed movies, but they are very entertaining. I think they could have kept Cavill, they could have kept Ben Affleck, they could have kept all these characters and just mildly rebooted it. But I understand like they're doing a 10-year roadmap. But I mean, if Hugh Jackman can play Wolverine at 67, like come on, man. Anybody there's a role anybody can do anything. Like it, I think you're at that point you're just trying to get underneath a salary cap. To me that's more about pay than anything else because you want to pay exorbitant because you need to keep your budgets low so you keep your profits high. That makes more sense to me. But yeah, I think it's kind of fatigue. I think the Patterson films are a separate universe. It's like the Joker movies; those are a separate universe too. So there's hints at the Patterson and Joker things are kind of like more trying to like real world Batman. But I think for me, the Patterson films they're entertaining, but they lack a sense of realism with Batman just walking around in kind of like broad daylight or walking around in front of the press and getting photographed. Like makes zero sense to me at all.
But you know what the
like
funny thing is? You know what the funny
yeah,
thing is?
but
Let's go back to the beginning. Okay. You're in the military, you get put in the military prison, yeah? You've been a naughty boy. It's time to go to the prison for a little bit. Maybe been fighting in a bar, whatever the reason. But I will say, and to put a serious tone to it, to those that serve, to keep our country safe, my utmost admiration and respect to them, because it's what gives us the democracy we have today. But with that said, they've been naughty boys or naughty ladies. They're in prison, right? They're doing a bit of time, a couple of days. What do they get given? A comic book. Why? So they can escape.
yeah,
Mind
yeah.
can escape, right? So we go back to the
Pass the
reality.
time.
We're trying to make it reality. So I look outside my window, I see reality. I live reality all the time. I turn on the screen and I'm into reality 2.0, ramped up on steroids, condensed as real life and hard. Where's the escapism gone? Do you see what I'm saying? Where's the room?
Yeah, Yeah, I think things can have a real world element, but I think our heroes are the ones that overcome our challenges. That's why we project ourselves onto them. And when that doesn't happen, or our heroes doesn't act quite like the heroes we think they are, then you're kind of like, ah, you know, like this is why people love Chris Evans so much as Captain America, because Cap has always done the right thing no matter what. And even if he fails, then he's like he takes accountability and he still goes and tries to do the right thing. But then that image kind of we project on Chris Evans too, because Chris is Captain America, and that's how we're always going to view him. So, it's yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, definitely, it's always about escapism. I think these stories we tell ourselves, it's about escapism, but they still have to be authentic, and we still, at the end of the day, excuse me, we want our heroes to win. We want them to overcome, and we don't want the bad guys to win, because the bad guys kind of win in our real world. The bad guys win sometimes, and that's not a good feeling at all, and I think the thing about it is that fantasy that people can go out and do the right thing, because I think everybody in their mind is like, if I had $1 billion, I could be Batman. I could, if I dedicated myself, I could actually do it. The same thing with Iron Man. I don't know if it'd be flying around or not, but I mean, it's definitely like, I think that's what makes these characters much more appealable, because they're at the end of the day, they're just real people with indomitable wills and creativity, and you can do all these great, amazing things. But that's the thing about our heroes that we read about is, I'm always trying to tell people, like, you can be the hero of your own story too. Like, there are things within you that if you really want something, you could really go for. Because yeah, I always get people always ask me about, like, well, I want to get into comics, and I'm always like, oh, cool, okay, well, how serious are you about comics? Like, how often do you draw? Oh, I draw like once a week, or once a month. And I was like, oh, bro,
Not enough.
that's I was like, that's not really serious. I was like, look, if you're really serious about something, you got to treat it like a sport, because that's the only thing that people can wrap their minds around. It's like, if you have a regular job, because I had a regular job, but I would still go home after my regular job, working 12-hour days, usually working construction, come home. I would sit and work till about 1 in the morning on comic books, doing independent comic books, and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, eat breakfast, and go out and do the same thing all over again. Like, the thing about it is, you gotta, like, that's your grind. That's it. Like putting in that 10,000 hours and creating that foundation for yourself, where you're putting in the time and effort. Because if you want to get good at basketball, you got to practice 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours, 5, 6, 7 hours all day, every day, even after practice. That doesn't stop. Kobe Bryant, after his regular practice, he would practice on his own. That guy would practice 3 times a day, like in the morning, go home in his chopper, ice bath, have lunch, go back, practice again,
That
and
goal.
then go home, go back again, and then in the evening go back and do his Lakers practice, and then ice up and go back and do the whole thing over again. I mean, that guy was so good, but this is what it takes to operate at that level. And for any type of vocation you're in, that's the type of dedication it takes. Like, if you want to be a writer or you want to be an artist, it's like you always got to be working on your craft. You always got to be grinding, because if you're not challenging yourself and pushing yourself that, oh, this is just okay or whatever, like, there's guarantee you there's somebody else who's actually grinding and working harder than you are and doing it better, and rightly so. And if they get there and they arrive before you, then you have no one to blame but yourself. It's like, hey, how bad do you want it, right? So
100%. I'll be honest. It has to be an obsession. You
it has
have
to
to
be.
be obsessed. I'm talking, but it's beyond obsession. And if you're passionate about something, it's not work. It is, I cannot live without this. I have to have it. I have to keep striving. It's almost as if, like, I created a sculpture, yeah, but I'm obsessed because it's still not what's in my head.
Right.
I'm,
You're chasing that perfection, that thing of what you want it to be. And I think that's the thing about it, is like, whatever vocation you're in, you really got to love what you do and enjoy what you do. Because if you're not, then you have to ask yourself, well, like, I think I always look at things from the lens of, like, my 10-year-old self and 18-year-old self. And I go back and say, are the things I'm doing now, would I make my 18-year-old or 10-year-old self proud?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you really should examine your life and say, well, what am I doing? And look at your life choices. Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I pursuing something that is just soul sucking and I don't enjoy. 'Cause like I'm telling you, life is so short. You're not going to get out of it alive, right? Like I said, we're all going to die. How do you want to spend that time? Or you want it spent pursuing and doing things that matter to you, and you want to leave a legacy in the world? Because whether you have kids or not, the work that you do and the lives that you touch and the people you impact are still your legacy. And if you're leaving a body of work behind, that could be it. Or if you're helping people achieve their dreams, that could be it as well. Like, how do you want to impact the world? And you want to do it through your art, or like, what are you doing that's making the world a better place? Or what are you contributing? Are you just taking? So it's this, we're in this world of culture now where everything is being turned up on its head. Your social norms are not norms anymore. You're being forced to conform. You're not allowed to have opinions anymore. If you have opinions that aren't the same opinions as everyone else, you have to agree with everybody. It's really a wacky world we live in. And at the end of the day, like, who are you at the end of the day, and what type of impact do you want to leave? How serious are you about what you're doing in your craft? And if you're not happy about where you're at or what you're doing, you really look at your life and try to make a change. And for those artists out there who always get discouraged and they tell me I'm too old or this or that, I'm like, look, man, Jack Kirby was like 45, 46 when he created the Fantastic Four with Stan Lee. So, like, look, man, like, if that guy in his almost 50 can do something and make something great, like, there is no excuse for anybody else. There is no excuse for anybody else to not go out and do something, because you can do it. And there's nobody holding you back. At the end of the day, like, you may have good excuses for doing something or not doing something, and they may be good valid excuses, but at some point, nobody gives a shit about your sad story. You got to just put that away and start focusing on what you want to do, man. Because at that point, it just becomes an excuse not to do something. And you got to stop telling yourself that lie. You just, like, you know what? No more excuses. I'm going to go for it. This is what I want to do. This is my plan. My plan can change or alter as I go, but I'm committed to this. This is what I want to do. And if people love you in your life and want to see you succeed, they'll be behind you. And if they don't understand it, not everybody has to understand every little thing that you do. But the thing is, if there's people in your life who love you, communicate to them why you want to do it, what your passion is, and what your plan is. Because you're just gonna, okay, I'm gonna quit my job and I'm just gonna go into dancing, and your partner is like, well, you've never danced ever in your life, and I want to be a ballet dancer. Well, what in your past has indicated that you wanted to do this? If you want to be a ballet dancer, then start small. Every night after work, I'm gonna take ballet lessons for 4 hours a night. I'm going to commit myself to this. I'm going to be the best Batman you could be, right? I'm going to do that and try to commit myself and see what I can do. You'd be surprised what you can do and what you can achieve once you put your mind to it. The thing is, you have to decide in your mind if you're really committed to it or not, you really want it. Because you're going to be tested every time, like, how bad you want it. Like, for every discouraging disappointment and mean review and jerkwad on the internet telling me I suck and whatever, like, if I listened to those people, I wouldn't have the life that I have now. I wouldn't be with the people I'm with now. I would be a miserable person. You can't let someone's thoughts or opinions about you stop you from doing something in your heart is the right thing for you to do, whether it's a job, vocation, or doing a thing or whatever. You have to do what's right for you. And if there's people who love you, they support it. If they don't, then that's fine too. Not everybody has to be on the same page, but the thing is, you have to share your plan. Who's on your team, right? If you've got people on your team depending on you, like kids and things like that, well, like, you just can't up and quit your job. You can talk to your partner about it, like, hey, you know what? I'm gonna go back. I wanna pursue this. So every night, I'm gonna put the kids to bed at 6, and from 7 to 10, I'm gonna be drawing every night. So I'm gonna go in the room, just let me do this. I'm really serious about this. I want to get good. This is really what I want to do. And see how that goes. Like, you got to make some plan or commitment to doing something. Because if not, you're just, you're like a plastic trash bag blowing in the wind. And you have no control over where you go. The wind does. You don't want to be like that. You want to be a bird. You could fly. You can go wherever you want. You can fly as high as you want. As long as your little wings will let you. It's up to you. So I think you determine your success and you determine your path. It's just again, you got to commit yourself to it. Like, it's just, you meet people all the time where you talk to them and you kind of know, like, oh God, they're so full of shit. Cause it's just like every excuse not to do something. And it's like, well, I said at some point you have to stop making excuses. If you're serious about it, you'll do it. And again, I always go back to the sports analogy. Like, you got to treat it like a sport. And if you're not, then you know what? This could be just a great hobby for you, and that's okay. But at some point you got to get serious about it.
100%.
Yeah, some people do, some people don't.
Why do you think you are where you are? What has got you to where you are?
I think for me, it goes back to who you are at your core. And you kind of have to be true to yourself. And if being true to yourself is drawing people in capes and their underwear inside out and saving the day, if that's who you are, then be okay with that and do that. I think you have to make your own choices, think for yourself, and decide what you want this life for you to be. You can craft whatever life you want. Look, Conor McGregor is a great example for all you MMA fans. The guy didn't know what he wanted to do. Thought, well, I'll get into plumbing, tried that, hated it. And he saw on TV about the fights. And he was like, I think I could do this. I think I really could. Like, if I dedicate myself to this and really apply myself, I could do it. That changed his entire life, man. And he had people there who supported him and loved him and helped him. That was his team that got him from where he was to where he's at. It's a great story, but it's a true story. And the thing is, there's a million examples of that. Like, Michael Jordan got cut from his high school basketball team, man. Like who cuts Michael Jordan, right? Like, George Lucas couldn't finance Star Wars. He had to finance it himself. Like, because he had directed a movie that bombed. Then nobody wanted
No, it's an independent film. Star Wars is independent by him. It wasn't made by Hollywood. He made it.
He made it. Yeah. So that's the thing. It's just like there are all these great examples of success, and you can take all these models and apply it to your life. The thing is, if you follow someone else's roadmap, you probably will become successful. You might not hit as high or as far as they did, but you will be successful if you follow their path. But the better path is to follow your own and carve out your own path in life, whatever it may be. And it's never too late to do that. Start small and work to bigger things. The thing about it is, it's harder to figure out things on your own. And if you can find people who could be on your team to help you figure that out faster, because the thing is, you want to fail up. Failing up is making mistakes and learning from them. The thing is, you don't want to make the same mistakes and keep making them. That's the problem right there. So figuring out who's on your team, learning from your mistakes, and having a goal to how you're going to get there. And the thing is, there's nobody telling you no unless you believe them. That's the thing about it. It's just like if you're really working to be a screenwriter and people are like, no. I'm like, well, fuck it. You know what? I'm going to write a screenplay and I'm going to shoot it myself. I'm going to hire some actors and we're just going to do small films. I'm going to shoot it on my iPhone camera. I'm going to cut it in Apple Movies and I'll release it for free. As much as we like to, there are no shortcuts in life. As many as we want to take, at the end of the day, you still have to do the work and the work has to get done and you still have to, it's hard work no matter what. And it's just like, look, man, just do what you think is right and do what's right for you and make those things that need to get made. You gotta try to run your own race and not try to be somebody else. As tempting as that is, because everyone wants someone else's life. I think all these people who always talk about wanting to be an influencer and they think, oh, well, they can do it, I can do it. And you're probably right. But the thing about it is just like an influencer's job is to change people's minds about who they are or what they think is good for them. And that's kind of a dangerous thing because if you really don't know who you are and what you're about, then you're going to be swayed by everything. Every little thing is going to, like the blowing of the wind, you're going to be like a kid running around a candy store sampling everything. But the thing about it is know what you want, know who you are. I think that's the big problem with a lot of people I come across today is they're not sure what they want. And then when you ask them questions like, well, what are you about? Who are you? Like, when people ask me, like, well, I'm a comic book artist. That's what I do. Like,
sometimes we need a mentor to reconfirm. It's interesting you say that because
right.
I believe that with yourself, you majored originally in science, and it was actually doing the minor, and there was a very famous artist, or he was very well accredited, who became your tutor, who actually steered you back towards the drawing because you saw
Well, yeah, it was, yeah, because like my parents, like my dad was the reason why I started doing comics. And then when I got older, my parents, very Midwest, they kind of like, we grew up in Colorado, and they're like, well, art is not a real job. Like in their minds, they can't wrap their minds around that because they don't understand it. They don't, it's a very old school mindset where it's like, get a job. My parents thought I was going to starve. They're like, hey, art is not a real job, because they didn't understand it. Um, which made it hard, because as a kid, you're trying to, it's hard enough to determine what you want to be for the rest of your life. You kind of know, but then when you don't have support and people are like, well, you do this, you're on your own. And you're just kind of like, that's a scary thing. Because the thing is, I was afraid if I fail, like, are they going to help me back up? And no, no, bro, that was it. I made this choice that I'm on my own. So, you know, um, so I did find other people who actually, this is what I talk about on your team. Like, when I was going to college, and, I had an art teacher named Robert Theory, and he was like this very famous painter, and he paints landscapes and city scenes. And he's like, hey, you should forget this science crap and do this art thing. You're so good at it. And every job that came through that office, I end up usually getting, because they're like, hey, Jonboy can do it. He's really good. He opened my mind up to things that were attainable and things I never thought I would do. Like, well, why don't you try an oil painting? Why don't you do some printmaking? Hey, why don't you try the airbrush? Like, why don't you do this? And he would let me do whatever content I wanted to do, just as long as I'm trying a new medium. He was trying to meet me where I was at, instead of push me into like, hey, instead of bagging on comics, he thought, well, comics is a great art form, like, well, what can you incorporate if you work on these new things, like maybe using, doing printmaking and doing comics? What do you think about that? Or do this or do that? Like, kind of opened my mind up to like, hey, like there's somebody who's an adult that I respect, who says that art is attainable for me. So it really, it changed my mind about a lot of things and my perception of things. And I think getting that support actually helped egg me on, because then I kind of rededicated myself. As soon as I graduated, I'm like, you know what? I want to go to art school. I want to start doing this. I started doing that. So instead of going to get my like master's, I wanted to be a forensic scientist. I wanted to get my master's in blood work, virology, things like that. Instead of doing that, which really pissed my folks off. My dad especially was not really happy about it. But look, at the end of the day, it's my life, not his. And look, if he wants me to get into science, I'll, why don't you quit your job? You go to school and you become a scientist. You do that. That's your dream. I love science, but I have this other dream. This is really what I wanted to do. This is what I should have been doing. So I'm going to do that, with or without you. This ship is sailing, either on the ride or not. That's it. And if you're not with me, that's cool. I don't want you and I don't need you. I can do this. I'll find another team, which I did. And that's it. Sometimes, you're going to have a lot of people in your lives who are going to support you, and you're going to have a lot of people in your lives who are going to be toxic. And sometimes at that point in your life, you just got to cut them out, man. It's like, you know what? Got to let them go. Right now, it's like, they could be people you love, people in your own life, but if they're going to be the people who are going to be talking negative into your life and beating you down, like, you don't need that. It's like, you know what? Cool. I hear you. I know where you stand on this subject, but you know what? Right now I can't hang with you, and that's it. Maybe some other time. And when I did hit it, the first things they always said was, we always supported you and believed in you. And I told them, like, you're so full of shit. They're like, no, what are you talking about? We all like, no, this is not, remember all the arguments we had and all this? Like, but we knew you were serious about it. I'm like, oh, come on, man. I was like, just be honest. Like, you guys didn't believe in it because you didn't understand it. And that's okay. But the thing about it is, at the end of the day, it's still about you and what you want to do with your life, and how are you going to apply yourself, and who's on your team. You really got to find out early on who's on your team, because if you're going to quit your job and you're like, hey, you want to move in with your folks and say, look, I'm trying to save money, I want to launch this thing, I want to live at home, but this is my plan. It's a 5-year plan. I want to create this platform. I want to do this, or I want to do that. Will you help me? if they love you and they believe in you, and they're like, yes, son, we'll do that for you because we believe in this. We know that you're not going to sell on your ass. We know that you're going to be writing or drawing the entire time. If they want to look at you, we're doing something, you're building it. You know who you are, you know what you want. And that's a thing that's lost on a lot of people is they're kind of going through life still and they kind of are still trying to figure it out. And you don't want to be a guy who's 40 or 50 still trying to figure it out because that's a dangerous spot to be because there's other people who are dependent on you at that point too. You have other responsibilities, you have kids, you have a wife. So if you're going to make these moves, you got to be, it requires a lot more planning and a lot more dedication. So it means might be a lot less sleep. So we're all yoked differently, but it goes back to like, you know, at the end of the day, how bad do you want something and what do you want for your life? Because you have to fight for everything that you want. And it's even harder to fight for it and keep it too, because everything is work and you can't be afraid of putting in the work. At the end of the day, things aren't going to get drawn or written by themselves. You have to sit down and do it. And like, you know, there are days where I'm like beating my head against the wall and imposter syndrome sits in and you feel like I can't draw an eyeball to save my life. But then the next day I'll draw 2 covers and sketch out something else. I'm just like, how did I do this? Like, oh my God, you know, but it just being grateful to have those times where you panic, but then pull it together, you know, but it's where your core value system is at too. You can't be afraid of work, man. I think it's, how bad you want it and who's on your team. It's a multitude of these things. And I think the thing about it is support too, because, you know, we're all going to get beat up at some point, but we need people to cheer us on, whether it's your girlfriend or partner or your wife or your folks. But I think as far as negative people, you really got to steer clear of that because the worst thing is to have a dream and be around people who are dream killers and shit all over your dreams because they had dreams and they didn't go for it. And they don't want to see somebody else achieve their dreams, which is a real bizarre thing to me because for me, I always want to see and help people come up higher and farther and faster than I ever have. Even in half the time, because then they have more time to smell the roses, enjoy life, enjoy their fruits, and pass on that knowledge and help somebody else out to do the same thing. Because then we all win. Like, you know, you're helping people achieve their ultimate Pokemon form, right? They're hitting these things sooner and becoming better, and hopefully they're humble and they don't drink their own Kool-Aid, you know, in that process that some people do, but use your powers for good, right? Try to pass on what you've done and help bring others up, you know, inspire others. Like, thing about it is just like, you know, be the hero of your own story, but be the hero to somebody else too, because you never know what your journey in life is going to do for somebody else and how that's going to inspire somebody, or the thing that you can do to help somebody to build them up to where that inspires them and lights the fire underneath them to help them kind of push through to that next level of their life, of things they want to do. You just don't understand the impact that one person has on the whole world. We can all change the world and make our own little, it sounds corny, I know, but like there are artists who, or editors who spent 5 minutes with me and it changed my entire life. You know, like it just changed the trajectory of my life. And for them, it's so very trivial and it's just who they are. Like, oh, I was just trying to help you out. Like, oh, you know, but for me, it made such a huge impact on me that it's like, okay, this guy believes that I can do it. I know I can do it. I can do it. And pushing yourself to do that, because it's those times when we feel beat down, and we're going to feel beat down because life will kick the shit out of you. It's just, you have to understand that it's not about staying down. It's about getting up and getting back on it and saying, you know what, I'm not going to let life kick my ass. I'm not. Do not give up. Do not give up, because it might take you 1 year to do it. It might take you 10 years to do it. But when you get there, it's going to be worth it. And you're going to be like, oh, I finally did it. And I understand it now. And for me, I feel like, you know, like I took a lot of detours in my life, you know, and I feel like I'm playing catch up with all my friends. I feel like I'm a decade behind all my friends who are in the creative field, because it took me longer to kind of figure things out. Because, you know, I went to college and got a regular degree, and I kind of sidetracked myself for such a long time, you know, and when I should have just been focusing on my passions in art and trying to level it up during that time. You know, it's easier to do those things when you're younger, because when you're as an adult, it's still attainable. It's just a lot harder because you're locked into your life now, like a little bit more. You have a house payment, you might have kids. There are your situation is different. It doesn't mean it's impossible though. So I think if you have a will, there's a way. You have to find that way for yourself, and you got to build your team too. It's so important to find people who love and support you and want to see you succeed. Because if you don't, you got to have people who can give you honest feedback, who can cheer you on, who can be honest with you about what you're doing and what you need to work on. You need those. You need feedback, and I think like some of the things you're working on is a whole feedback system for people to level up. I mean, that is what we need in order to punch through is honest feedback, because it's like as a kid, everything you draw, your parents quote unquote love, and they put on the fridge, and next day it's in the garbage, right? But the real feedback you need is actually people telling you like, hey, you know what, like your anatomy is a little off, like when you approach it like this, like that. When you're storytelling, think about this. When you're concepting, it's more about this. Like this is the attitude, the thought process you need to have. When you're approaching story, like keep this in mind. When you're writing this character, man, this thing feels a little inauthentic. I feel like the person would do this instead of that. And this is my reason why, because I'm reading your story, this is who this person is to me. And if you're like, well, that's true. That's a version of me, but maybe I need to add a scene in there where he decides why he's making the decision that's kind of contrary to his whole belief system. There has to be that thing that kind of ties everything together. You know what I mean? So it's just, I mean, I think this is why we see a lot of people in their midlife have a crisis. They go out and divorce their wives and get a young girlfriend and buy a hot car or run away from their lives because they wanted something more, and they just quit their lives completely in order to try to get it. And that's not the right way to do it. The right way to do it is have a plan and have a support system and figure out a way for yourself with your team to get where you need to go. But the thing is, you can't be afraid to put in the time to do it, because hard work and time trumps talent. Because if you're talented and you've been talented your whole fucking life, you pretty much celebrated your whole life. You don't know what tough time is. You don't know. You've never been challenged. You've never met people better than you. You don't know what it's like to struggle. But for people who start with a little bit of talent, but put in the hard work and time to do that, you understand what it's like. You understand how competitive it is. You didn't start out great out of the box. People didn't worship you for your abilities right out the gate. Everything was hard work. You're humble and you have an attitude of like, you know what it takes to create a good foundation for success, to achieve what you need to do and to be who you need to be. I think that's the hardest thing, is to be someone who is super talented right out the gate and has never had to struggle until they enter the job market and they find out there's 1,000 of them in a room and they don't know how to handle it, and they just freak out and they run away and they decide, I don't want to be a big fish in a big ocean. I want to be a big fish in a small pond, and they run back home, and that's where they stay. So you can't let fear stop you from these things, and you have to be real with yourself of where you're at in your journey. But you got to set goals, man, and you got to work. Like, I feel like I'm a broken record. I keep saying it is about these things.
Oh, no, but the message
is trying to stress, like, this is the attitude and concepts you need to have in order to make it. And you got to believe in yourself. You got to stay positive, and you got to imagine yourself hitting those successes every day and saying, you know what, I can do this. I can do this. Doubt creeps in. You're like, you got to push that out and say, I can do this. Just because I'm not able to do this today does not mean that I'm not going to be able to do it tomorrow. I'm going to hit it even harder tomorrow. You know what? If you're having a bad day and you're a basketball player and you can't hit your free throws, you know what? Guess you're staying after and you're hitting an extra 100 free throws until you get it right.
Yeah.
You put in the time to do it, and you're just like, I'm just going to keep doing it. I'm going to keep doing it until it happens. And you have to learn to push through those things, because these things are just short moments. They're not forever. Bad times may last a year or 5 years, but it's not forever. At some point, you're going to have a breakthrough and things are going to turn around. It's just whether or not, how much can you endure? What is your willpower? How bad do you want it? You know what I mean? It's, you gotta have some cojones, some balls here to stick it out. And I don't even mean to be sexist. This applies to anybody, but it's just where's your mettle at? Where's your courage? What's your value system? Like, don't quit. Don't quit. Don't let them be right, because you quit, everyone who's dogged you in your whole life about you chasing your dreams, you're instantly validating them. And fuck those people. You know, I started using language, so just forget those people and their opinions. It's like their opinions of you do not dictate who you are and the person you want to be.
I totally agree with you, John.
What it does is you determine who you are and who you want to be. Be the person you want to be. Be the hero of your own story.
I 100% agree with you.
Yeah,
I agree.
sure.
Forget those people.
Yeah, forget those people, man.
How has things changed for you going into the writing element of comic books now? So you was, doing it in the artistic form.
You know, it's a new thing. I'm very thankful and grateful that there are a small group of people who believe in me to let me write and draw. I'm doing a creator project, but I'm also working on an Assassin's Creed thing where I'm getting to write and draw. I got to do a Red Sonja thing where I got to write and draw. I think it's proving to everybody else in the world that the stories I'm writing are appealing. So you have to put yourself out there and have some small victories, and enough small victories where people can read it and enjoy it and say, oh, he's not a bad writer. That's actually pretty cool. Like, I kind of like his stories. Like, okay, cool. And then they'll give you, then that's when offers might come in and say, oh, well, we want you to write this. Do you want to do that? Do you want to do this? But the thing is, you have to put in the work for it. You have to show people that you're not just an artist, you are a creator, that you're just not a pretty face who draws cool characters and cool pictures, that you have this whole other bag of tricks that they never knew about. But the thing is, you have to share your bag of tricks. You have to show them the show if you want admission, right? So it's like, this is the show. This is how good the show is. Like, you want tickets or what? Do you want to come in and check this out? And that's the carrot and stick. But there are things that you have to prove to people sometimes in order to get those other things to transition out of a certain career into something higher. You have to, it's kind of like if you are a mid-level manager and you want to be a manager, you have to start asking for more responsibilities that the general manager has. You have to be the job that you're not being paid for and show them that you can handle the job and handle responsibilities, because people are just like, oh, geez, that guy's great. Like, oh, wow. And then you got to find mentors and people who support you, who's on your team, who can support you, who can give you feedback. So all these things, it's like this grand scheme for your life that you really got to think about it and plan it out.
What is the writing format in comic books?
Well, comic books, a lot of what happens in comics happens in between the panels. So, you're writing moments, and those moments should link up panel to panel. But the idea is, for me in writing, it's always about what's my idea, and what's my idea, who's my character, what do I want to say about this character, and how's this character going to change in the story? That's the first thing that I write out on note cards, and I'll figure that out. And if there's something I want to happen in the story, I'll write that down on a note card and just pin it on my wall and say, okay, where in this story should this thing happen? Like, what are the things I want to happen? And like, what type of trials do I want the character to go through? And then and then how is that character going to arc? You ask yourself these questions like, okay, is he an evil person? And what has to happen to make him change his ways? Well, does he get in a car accident and somebody who hated him helped him and saved his life? And then what impact does that have? Like, it's these cause and effects things. How do you make that story identifiable? Because the thing, and authentic. Like, for me, it's always about authenticity. Like, what are we saying about this person, and what are they willing to go through in order to achieve their end? So it has to feel like, okay, well, I can see this, I can understand these concepts. Because if not, then the story kind of falls apart, because you're like, well, I don't really, it doesn't feel right for the character, because you'd be writing a Batman story, and then the moment Batman picks up a gun, you're like, okay, you totally lost me. Why would he do that? You know what I mean? So, but there has to be a reason for that. If you're writing a story about Batman who picks up a gun, like, why? And like, make people understand that, like, you just can't have them just do that. It's got to be. So when I'm writing things, it's a lot of like writing note cards and pinning things on note cards, but writing about like what type of story I want to tell. Because usually when you are writing a story, you kind of have an idea of what you want in your head. What do you have to say? That's the first thing I think as a creative, like even as an artist, what are you trying to say? Like, what is your goal? Like, and if you're telling a story, like, what's the point of your story? Why should your story exist? Like, you have to ask yourself, like, well, what do I want a story about? Who is this character at the beginning of the story, and who do you want the character to be at the end? And then what are the events that are going to happen within the story that are going to get them to where they're going to end up as a person? Because it's about the hero's journey, about who this character is and who they become. And it could be about a hero who becomes a villain, or it could be a villain who becomes a hero, or it could be a poor kid who transitions into a successful person, or a rich kid who loses his parents, who uses his parents' fortune to become something else to fight crime, so this never happens again. It could be any of these things, and I think you just have to figure out what you want your story to be. Kind of like your life. It's the same thing with your life. What do you want your story to be, and how are you going to tell your story? It's the same thing. Because these characters throughout your story go through a process of reinvention and incorporating new ideas and concepts in their lives that they've never really looked at before or were forced to face. And that's true of our own lives. I think we're kind of our own hero's journey when you think about it. But um, there are a lot of parallels, and that's what's so good about stories is you can incorporate a lot of your real life and things that are happening and adapt it into your stories or screenplays. That makes it believable because you're actually writing from a real place, because you yourself have experienced these things. Because I think if there's no emotional punch to your story as far as the why, or there's no pain involved, like, it's really hard for people to really empathize or understand where your characters are coming from. Because no character wants to read a story about a character who's had it good their whole life. And the story continues and ends with they continue to have it good their whole life. How boring is that? Nothing happens. Hey, wow, he got a Porsche. Oh, wow, he got this now. His dad gave him that. Wow. It's like, no offense, but like, fuck that guy. We probably hate that dude. That guy would be like, I get everything. I just asked for it and they gave it to me. And you're just like, we probably hate that guy. He's always rubbing in our faces. They're like, oh man. It's not that we hate him. It's just like he's always getting cool shit. And it's just like, oh man, like, okay. You know what I mean? There's nothing that's believable about that guy. There's nothing that we like about that character. Because it's just like, well, who wants to read about a character who always gets everything he wants and there's no consequences to his life? Where's the conflict at? What happens is maybe he finally gets cut off, and that's where the conflict is. And his dad says, I'm cutting you off now. You've had it too good. You don't get anything anymore. Now you have to work for it. And what happens to that character, and his whole life unravels. It's like, oh no, it's like, what happens then? So I think there's a multitude of ways you could take it. I think it's just, for me, it's always about, like, again, what type of story do you want to tell, and what do you want your characters to be about? And I think that's where you start. Because again, if they're not authentic or identifiable, like, who wants to read about fake friends? Who wants to read about a fake person? You know what I mean? Like, we have so much already. Like, I'm looking at TikTok. Like, everybody's got a glamorous life, and that shit's not true. Come on, man. Like, it's like a beautiful woman on a yacht taking yacht parties all the time in different locales and stuff like that. Like, oh my gosh, it must be a wonderful life. But there's a lot of hard work that's involved in it. That's like an idealized version of someone's life, and you can't fall for that. That's not reality. It's not. There's this hard work that happens in between. So
It's the best stories are struggles, because
I
it
think so.
maybe reminds us of that life isn't that simple. Very few get it easy. Very few get it a smooth run. It doesn't exist. There's
It doesn't
always
exist. There's no such thing, because I think we've all had it bad at some point. But the thing is just remembering who you are and where you came from, to kind of keeping it real, right? We keep it real, and thank God for those friends who help us keep it real, right? Because we're not keeping it real. Our real friends will tell us, like, man, you changed, man. And you're like, oh no. So, yeah.
in terms of video game design. What would
Yeah.
you add on that? How was your experience with it, and how does that differ from the books? What's the demand?
Well, so I think when you're designing within a team, when you're talking in terms of design, you always want to ask the right questions first. So, especially in a team environment. So if you're working for, like, at Riot, it's like, what's the goal here? What are we trying to design? and usually you want to talk to your game designers because they program all the gameplay, and like, hey, you want to have conversations. You always want to talk to people who help the gameplay and say, well, what do you want to see? What hasn't been done? And what would be fun for our players? So you get those concepts like, well, we want somebody who harpoons somebody, or somebody who teleports, or somebody who could fly over the map. That'd be a game changer. Like, oh, okay, cool. All right. So you take these concepts because you want to have conversations, because it's just not one person who's doing stuff at big game companies. And there's all these guys online who are like, I designed this. It's like, no, motherfucker, you designed this with the whole team. It's not just you, right? There's no such thing as I in a video game team. If you're taking all the credit, you're a shitty person for doing it, right? So anyway, sorry, I'm that's a different trail. Anyway, so you always want to have those questions with your designers and developers outside of the main team and say, what do you guys want to see? And then you bring that to the main team. It's like, hey, I talked to designers, and like, these are the things that they'd like to see. So that kind of defines your bullseye. Because when you're designing, you don't want to design shooting arrows in the dark. You want to define that bullseye, where the target is. You want your arrows to kind of be in the target area. So you always want to have those conversations first with those around you who are involved in making that game or that process. Like, what do you want to see? What haven't you seen that you want to add? And then once you have a conversation with your main design team, it's like, okay, cool. So main design team, what's a character that we can incorporate these things with? And do we want to make it anthropomorphic, like an animal? Or do we want to make it a person, a man or a woman, or a thing, or a box of rocks? Like, what is it going to be? You want to ask these questions. And usually in games, there's this weird homogenation that happens where everything starts feeling the same. And you have to not drink your Kool-Aid and understand, like, look, we have to make our characters and shapes diverse. So if we have a lot of female characters, look, we either have a male character or an anthropomorphic character or a plant character. We need to change up the shapes, because shapes in games change up and add something new. And when you talk to your game designers, incorporate things that they want to see, that changes the gameplay entirely. It adds a whole new level. Oh wow, we haven't seen this yet. This is great. This changes the gameplay. So once you have those premises figured out, like, okay, well, we want to make it a anthropomorphic character that flies across the map. Okay, cool. And then that gives you something to design around, like, well, flight. Okay, is it a bird? Is it a flying reptile? Is it a reptile bird? Is it this? Is it that? Is it like a little cute character that evolves into this big heroic character? Like, that's where you start asking the question. You start whittling down. You start narrowing what that target looks like. They're like, okay, cool. We want it to be like it starts out like an egg. And as you go through the map and you're playing, as he levels up to his ultimate, he hatches out of the egg. It's just an egg with feet, and he fights. And then as he levels up, okay, maybe he's now a little bird, and then he's a bird, and then he's a bigger bird, and then he evolves in like this ultimate eagle form, right? And that's the ultimate for that character, and that's how his powers work, and this and that and that. And that gives you a whole design concept to rally around for the whole team to design. Okay, what's the best freaking eagle we can design that exists in our world that does this and this character, and blah 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 blah. But it always starts out with a conversation, because you don't want to give people what they're always used to getting. We just talked about that in movies. At that same point, it becomes a downward spiral. It's a losing concept. It's like, well, more of that. It's like, great, okay, give me another powerful, sexy lady with an axe. Oh my gosh, like, great. It gets boring after a while. You want to change up the gameplay. You want to change how your players interact, and you want to have those conversations. But it always starts out with the conversation first. And you have to allow your design within the team to evolve, because it's not your design. If it's your design, then go start your own game company and do that. But if it's not, you gotta let everybody gets their input on creating that cool thing. At the end of the day, it is gonna be what it is. But the team did that. And that's something is sometimes the hardest thing for people, is to kind of table your ego a little bit. Look, you can be cock of the walk and everything at your company, but like, you got to play nice with everybody. And you're that example. You're being that example for everybody else about how a team should function, and valuing everybody's contributions and the conversations. But as you have those conversations, the team kind of gravitates to those designs and concepts that are best for that character. Because in the end, you're creating things in games for your players, not for you. You're not creating things for you. This is not about your ego. It's about adding something great for your players that's going to change the gameplay, that's going to create more money for your company, and everyone's life and your way of life continues and everybody wins. And you have to have that type of team attitude if you want to succeed in games. Because the worst thing in games is when people become the eyes and they want to take credit for what everyone is doing and they want to be the progenitors of this thing and have their, like, it's like, look, your name's attached to it, but like, this is the whole company thing, and you want people to be involved in that. Because if everyone is contributing and everyone's leveling up and feeling a part of the team, like, your life is good, things are great, it's exciting, you're being challenged, you've got new ideas coming across, you're doing things you never thought you'd ever do as far as creating character design and things like that, because everyone is having a conversation about what is good for this character or what is good for our players, and I think same thing in comics too. The team environment is super important, but the level is, in what capacity does your team want you to participate? For me, I like the teams that it's myself, the writer, and an editor talking about what our passions are and coming up with a concept that we think would be great for everybody. And that's our team. The teams that I don't like working for is very top-down teams where they just tell you, okay, you're drawing this and this is what it needs to look like, and we don't care about these designs. We want He-Man and he's gonna have a laser gun. And for me, I'm not that type of guy to be like, sign me up for that, because I'd be like, no, I can't do that. Like, He-Man doesn't have a laser gun, he has a sword. That's it. Sorry, man. But I mean, the thing is, you have to set yourself for success in these things, that how these things are structured, whatever location you're in. You got to know what type of person you are, where you can work with it and where you can't. And it's just like, okay, like, I can do this I can't, because at the end of the day, you got to sit down and do the work. And if you're doing something that you don't love, your heart's not in it, man, it's like the work suffers. For me, it's like, I was working on a video game project and working on Marvel characters, and I've been doing Marvel characters for 30 years. And then I'm getting notes on how to draw Marvel characters and how their faces need to look and things like that. And I'm just like, okay, like, I'm out, man. Like, I'll do these, I'm done, I'm out. Because like, for me, it's like, I know how to draw these characters, and you're asking me to draw in my style to do this, and that's not my style. And in my mind, that's not what good looks like. And for me, I'm going to work on projects that allow me to work on things that I know what good looks like. Because good for me, as far as like my work. Because if I'm making compromises on my art that I don't like, or like, and I could be wrong, like 2 years down the road, like, oh man, they were totally right about that. That chin needs to be way bigger or whatever. But, I think for that point in time, you have to understand like what is good for you. If you're designing things and you kind of know what good looks like, and there's a lot of bad ideas floating around, sometimes in that team environment, you're getting a check. It's like, okay, cool. You let those bad concepts be those concepts, and then you're just getting a check. You can take those same concepts and create it for yourself later on down the road. Save that for yourself. Put that in your pocket, in your little portfolio, and say, you know what? I'll keep that design for me then. That's what I'll do for me for my own stuff. That's all right. Cool. You can have all this other stuff. It's okay. So I think just understanding that, but I think designing for games when you're working in games, it's very much about having conversations with people who are part of it, because they're gonna add something that you probably never even thought of, like designing for games, talking to the game designers as far as what they want to see for gameplay, because they get bored programming the same crap, man. Trust me, they want to change it up. They want a little like, hey, put some candy in that pinata, baby. Let's try to change it up. So you always want to have those conversations, like, hey, you guys got ideas? I'd love to hear them. And people are like, wow, people want to listen to me. Great, awesome. I'm like, yeah, people get excited and energized when you're asking for their input to make something. Because then when that champion or that thing comes out, they're like, hey, yeah, that was my idea. Like, I helped contribute to that. I'm so excited about it. This does this thing for this game. It's so awesome. everyone lights up, everyone's involved, everyone's engaged. It's like it's a really great thing to see that when everything's hitting on all 8 cylinders or 4 cylinders or 6 cylinders or whatever size of vehicle you're driving. You know what I mean? When it's hitting, you're like, man, this feels great. And when it's not, though, oh man, you're like in games, things aren't hitting or the culture's bad. You're just like, man, dude, get me out of here. This is just not good, not good at all. But I mean, you kind of know it. I think in everything, it's like any relationship you're in, you kind of know healthy ones, and you kind of know when you're in a battle and you're like, yeah, I can't stay here, man. This is not good. So, yeah.
Have you been involved in the building of game design documents?
I think for character design and world building, I have over at Riot. Even for comics, like designing Teen Titans and Inhumans and things like that, like redesigning those characters. Yeah, I've been involved in those things. Because sometimes you kind of have to fight for your design a little bit, because sometimes in certain companies things are very top down, and it's kind of like, well, if the team, your direct team, is all for what is already done, whatever management pushes above us, we just push back. I'm like, nah, sorry, we're good. This is it. We're good. We're good with this. Like you can push back as a team, but
well, what makes a game design document stand out?
Well, I think the thing is, it goes back to your narrative. What is your game about, and what's your goal to achieve? Because if your game is just a knockoff or another game, well, it doesn't matter what your designs look like, as long as it kind of looks and feels like the game that you're copying, right? But if you're trying to create something new and different, then that's a whole different kind of conversation, because it's not just you. You want to have a conversation with people like, okay, we're going to create a Harry Potter game. We don't want to look like a real life Harry Potter game. We want it to be kind of like, we're like, we want to do something like Mario Kart, something fun and cartoony. But then that, again, is designing, it is kind of clearing your bullseye a little, like, okay, this is the target. This is where the target's at. Okay, cool. Okay, let's look at Mario Kart and things like Mario Kart and see what design sense we can pull out of it. That's where us as a designers, we just start kind of playing like Harry Potter and Mario format and this format and Zelda format, and trying to like play with the shapes and the designs until you come up with something that is totally unique. Like, this feels unique. Because for me, I want to do things that feel familiar but are different. That plays off of like emotional attachments as far as fandom. Like, oh, that's Robin. You see it, that's Robin, but even a cooler version of it. And that's what you want. But you want to give something to people that they haven't seen yet. And that usually is changing up the style a little bit, being different, being unique. Being weird in life and in design is the single biggest strength that a creative person has. Yeah. Because it's a unique vision that nobody else has, that separates you from everybody else. And people might try to imitate it, but they're never going to be as strong or as good as the original progenitor, right? So I would say that it's always about having conversations, but when you're creating these design Bibles and things like that, it's about what the team is thinking, your art director, everybody involved in that process, what that world should be. Like, what haven't we seen yet that we want to do with a Harry Potter vehicle? And you ask that, well, you pull all the Harry Potter stuff that's been in existence as far as video games, and you look at it, and you'll know right away, like, oh yeah, we can do better. And like, well, what do we want to do? Well, let's do something fun. But it's supposed to be fun. How do we make it fun? Well, look at this. We designed it like Mario Kart, characters and gameplay and how it moves. That would be fun. That would be engaging. That would add a different level, because no one's ever seen that. And that's a win in itself, because people will pick it up and appreciate it just for the design sense. But then when they have the gameplay along with the design sense, now you're creating engagement and enjoyment. That creates loyalty. That creates, we start emotionally projecting like, oh, this is so great. This is so fun. Because the love we have for characters, it's like Sonic, right? When they try to change the design of Sonic for the movie, people rallied against it, because people have played Sonic for like 20 or 30 years and enjoyed it with their friends, and they have an emotional attachment to that Sonic design. So if you're doing a Sonic movie, it better freaking look like that, because if it doesn't, that's not Sonic. That's not my Sonic. You see what I'm saying? So you got to keep these things in mind when you're doing that. Like, okay, well, if there's fandom attached to it, what are the elements of this that we need to incorporate that's going to make people feel good about this new iteration that we're doing? Because the worst thing you could do is throw everything out and start from zero, because you're basically disrespecting every fan that love that property. It's like the DC universe scrapping everything about the Snyderverse. You're saying all that time and money that people invested and hours watching and enjoying those films don't mean anything.
Mhm.
Kind of a disservice, because if you're going to keep certain people like John Cena, but you're going to get rid of Henry Cavill, doesn't make a lot of sense. Not really, but okay, you're just better off starting from zero. Like, like Ezra Miller. The fact that the guy's still acting is beyond me. I don't know what. You and I do that, that would be it, man. We'd be canceled immediately. It's like, come on. So that's a different conversation. But I guess what I'm saying is creating concept Bibles, it's always about conversations. You have to start out with conversations with people involved. And for me, is what are your goal? Is your goal just to be a ripoff, or is your goal to be something unique? And if it's to be unique, then you go back and look at everything that's been done with that IP, and you say, well, what haven't people seen? What do people love about that? Take those elements and what people haven't seen, and see if you can come up with something unique that they haven't seen that marries both of them that people would get excited about. Because the worst thing you could do is just give people the same crap. And like, I've seen this already. This game wasn't fun 10 years ago. Why am I playing this game now? Like, why would I do that? Because you want to set everything up for success right out the gate. And for me to do that is you got to be weird and you got to be unique, man. Just be weird and unique. Like, okay, like, cool. People have a certain fan attachment. Let's see if we work those elements into the game. That way we appease those fans. You're not going to appease everybody, but also unique enough to where people look at it and say, oh, it's its own thing. They're not trying to copy somebody else. They're trying to be a little bit more unique. You have a better chance of being successful by doing that instead of just copying some other formula. And it's just like, formulas are great, but if you're copying like League of Legends started out as a Dota ripoff, but what League of Legends did was it embraced narrative and named the characters and gave characters backstories. That's what separated itself from Dota, because these characters now that you're projecting yourself onto, they have histories and backstories and emotional loss and pain and all this stuff that you can identify with, that you're playing. Like, I like playing Katarina because she's this and that, and like identify with her character. Like, that's fan loyalty, versus Dota, where it's random ranger, goes through this. And it's more about what the character's attributes are and not who the character is. That's the difference between those two games. It's the narrative that's attached to it. Dota, no narrative. League of Legends, tons of narrative. Tons of things that you can emotionally attach to, versus emotional attachments just to gameplay and to win. It's not about winning in League of Legends. It's about having fun with your friends who play games. Now, if you're a competitive player, then that's different. But in the end, it's just stuff to have fun with your friends.
Mhm.
That's basically it. So I hope that helps. I don't know. I feel like we talked.
Listen,
Felt
it's
like I was over the map, but
wonderful
yeah.
knowledge. You're talking about, you're cutting away all the noise and you're talking about exactly what, it takes to achieve in these areas. And the key parts of, like, for instance, straight away for, video game design, it's collaboration.
Yeah.
I said this on a previous episode, is when someone knows what they're talking about, they travel to value very quickly and they simplify something that can be very complicated or has so many opinions. But sometimes there's too many opinions that actually haven't been there and done it. That's the difference.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about failing up, is you have to screw up a lot in order to get that wisdom to understand what works and what doesn't. And unfortunately, I've done both. Unfortunately, I've had a lot of people who still gave me work after that, thank God. But that's the thing about, like, when you learn, then try to be that change that you want to see now, and understand, like, hey, like, oh, okay, yeah. You're taking new information in and you're letting that information change you, and saying, oh, okay, well, this is why this is a good change. It's something I need to incorporate because this is what's best for the team, and this is this is the type of attitude I need to have. But you kind of know right away when you walk in. That's the difference between working freelance and working in-house. When you're in-house, it's very much about the team ideas. When you're freelance, it's about putting out the best idea that you think needs to be done, because you're just there to execute at that point. Because whatever designs you deliver that you think are the best that you think the game needs to be, that goes to the design team and they'll take it from there. And then they'll iterate on that. So there's two different mindsets on that you just need to understand. I mean, there's so much nuance in working in games, and there's a lot of things that can go right and wrong. Like, we probably don't have time to talk about it now, but I think this is more about understanding what it takes to dedicate yourself to becoming what you want to do and doing what you want to do, and then staying there, and the type of attitudes and ideas that you have to have and implement in your life in order to stay there or to work well with teams and things like that too. That's the kind of shoe that drops, because the thing is, once you break in, the second trick in your magic act is staying in, because once I've achieved it, now I'm published, or I've sold a screenplay, how I'd sell another one, or how do I be involved in the creative process, and then that's a whole other learning curve on top of that. But I mean, but that's what you want, is that person who you start out with. It's your hero's journey. That your journey is going to turn you into a better person. That's the idea. Hopefully, it doesn't turn you into an asshole, right? So you hope not.
But listen, that can happen, because in the character arcs,
I've seen it happen. Yeah, it's horrible. It's just, but then you just don't work with those guys, because those guys are like jerks. Yeah, he's like, all right, like, oh, why don't you work with the guy? I was like, like, I don't like that guy. He's kind of a dick, So
what's kept you humble? You've been at different companies in the world. Why are you so humble?
I think being bottom, coming from the bottom and working your way up, and understanding that at some point we're all going to be at the bottom again, and understanding that as great as you are, there's always going to be someone who's better or faster or younger. And at the end of the day, you just got to learn to run your own race and be happy with the things that you're doing and contributing. Because in the end, you're not accountable or answerable for what everyone else around you is doing. You're just there to account for the things that you've done and what you put into the world. And that's all that matters, because that's all you have control over. So just focus on that, right? And for me, I don't want to be a negative person, and I don't want to be that guy who's holding people down. I just want to help build people up and make cool things and make great things, put great things in the world. And like, I want to have fun and take care of my family and live a good life, and leave this place a little better than I came into it. I think that's it, and I think it goes again about who your core values are at your core. And for me, again, you always got to take it back to, like, would your younger self want to kick your ass as an adult because you turned out to be such a jerk? And you have to ask yourself that, like, wow, would I be disappointed with who I am now if my younger self met me? Like, wow, like what happened to you? Like, like, I think those are the things you have to ask yourself, because who you are at your core is who you are when you were young, because the world was new to you, but you already had these set of values. You knew what was important to you and what really mattered to you, even at that young age. And those things don't really change unless you allow the world to change those things. And if you let the world beat that out of you and you've lost that, then that's kind of a sad thing. No one wants to grow up into an old, kind of grumpy, jaded person. No, who wants to be around that guy? Like, who wants to work with those people? I think we want to work with people who want to bring out the best selves of us, who challenge us and help us level up and help us grow and get better. And I think that process never stops, and you never want it to stop, because you don't want to stay the same artist, and you don't want to stay the same person either. You want to keep evolving your craft and getting better. Like, you don't want people to come up to you like, yeah, your work really hasn't changed in 10 years. And you're just kind of like, oh, that's scary, because then you're not challenging yourself. You're just
but not if you're still prime. You know what I mean? Not if you're trapped in your prime. That's class.
Well, yeah, you gotta keep pushing yourself, right? Because the thing is, it's like, you can't be afraid of new things and new ideas. You gotta, like, okay, well, what's value here? Like, oh, well, like, okay, well, here's the computer. The computer was a new thing that revolutionized comics. I could have been doing comics the old school way and just still, I do all my layouts digitally now. I use SketchUp and things like that to create time savers. That's why I can focus more time on like doing cooler, tighter line art. There's all these things that come into play. That learning process never stops. The point where it stops, it's where it's like, okay, well, I'm old. I'm just kind of like, I made my money. I'm good with just cranking out the same crap, and that's okay too. Like, wherever you at, whatever decision you make for yourself is the right decision. You just have to be okay with it. But if you're crying over like, oh, everyone's better than me, well, then what do you need to do to get better? You need to draw more. You need to learn a new program. You need to paint, learn how to digitally paint. Like, what is it? And then they say, well, I need to digitally paint. Well, can you digitally paint? I don't know how to. Well, what's stopping you? You got a computer. Like, what? Buy a tutorial. Copy the tutorial. Learn. It's going to take you another 1,000 hours, 10,000 hours to learn it. So start now and get better at it. Like, what's the fear? Oh, I got another thing for me to learn. Yeah, that's life, man. There's always going to be changes, and if you want to keep doing what you're doing, you want to be competitive, and these are things you're gonna have to learn, and it goes with it. It doesn't end, man. Like
it doesn't. Listen, they say getting to the
no.
top is hard. Staying on top is even harder.
Can you imagine writing a screenplay on a typewriter? Can you imagine doing that?
Easy work. For me,
Well,
I do it without hands.
Okay, well, you see what I'm saying though? Like you're
No, of course. Listen, we're in a privileged society now. We can, where people would have handwritten, we can just, copy, paste, delete in a digital document. It's level.
You want force multipliers and these things, but you have to spend time to learn that in order to apply those force multipliers that help you get better. And I'm not talking about cheats like AI, okay? I'm not talking about writing in some prompt and ripping somebody off, okay? Like if you really want to draw like somebody else, then you copy their drawings on your own, but you figure out why they're making those decisions they're making. Why is that line there like that? Is that a style thing, or is this or it's that? You got to break down someone's style, and you just don't like. You know what I'm saying? There are like, look, man, there's no easy path, and if you think it's going to be easy, guess what? It's not, because for every easy thing, there's something that's going to come back and bite you in the butt because you took the easy way, and it's going to tell you like, don't take the easy way.
Yeah.
We do things because it's hard, and but it's more rewarding at the end of the day. Like
what's that famous saying? Is it good times make soft people,
right? Hard times make hard people. Like
they make it the best. I don't know. It's almost.
Yeah.
I agree. I think you've got to be challenged, and at the end of the day, listen. Sadly, there are people out there. There's a few who think they can roll out of bed and become millionaires and film it on the phone. The millionaires.
Yeah. That's the thing about it, though. Is like, you know what? I got my own race to run. Sun's gonna come up whether I wanted to or not, and I make that decision every day to be who I want to be. And I think you just got to run your own race, and people can say or do whatever they want. I think at the end of the day, all that matters is what you're doing, what you're creating, what you're building, and that's the real proof in the pudding about if you're the real deal or not. Sorry. That's what counts. That's what matters at the end of the day is what you create and what you're putting out into the world as far as art and writing and things like that. And people can talk all they want because we're talking right now, but the thing is talk the talk, but do you walk the walk? Do you do it? And
they say, can you walk the talk?
Yeah, there you go. Walk the talk. There you go.
True, isn't it? Can you walk what you say? And I think the best thing sometimes is to keep things internally and walk it. Don't tell anybody, just do it.
Sometimes you got to tell your team what your goals are because your team, the people in your life who are supporting you are your accountability because you're accountable to them because they are depending on you and you're dependent on them. So you got to communicate to your team what your goals are because they're the ones who are going to keep you accountable. Like, hey, oh, John, like, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm taking it easy tonight. I'm just having a hard time. Like, no, you said you're going to write one page a day. Have you written a page? No. Well, I guess you better stop watching TV. You need to go up and write that page. You're like, all right. That's the type of people you want in your life.
Of course.
People who won't let you cheat and won't let you slip and won't let you sell yourself short. That's the type of people you want because, 1000%. Like you want that. You want those people on your team. But I mean, everyone else, like you don't have to tell everyone what you're doing. Not everyone needs to know your great ideas. You know what I mean? Just when they're ready to share and you put it out there, then you share it. Until then, it's always about working on that hard work, grinding, and getting things done. That's it. That's all the thing. That's the only thing that matters. At the end of the day, you're doing this because you want a better life for you and your family. And
Mhm.
that's the greatest thing you could do is do something you love, be really successful about it, and take care of people you care about. That's so cool. Like, hey, mom, I bought you a house, or hey, you know what? Hey, I paid off our house, or I did this, or I did that. And it's just like those are those fruits that like people are like, yeah, that's really cool. Like that's what you want. That's the like, hey, cool dad, like, yeah, high five. Oh, that's the great things in life. So that's why you do. Yeah.
The, and just finally, the organizations you've been at, whether they be in gaming or comic books, are they open to new content? Are they open to new stuff that's out there? Are they open to finding people that have
Well,
yet
I
to be
think
discovered?
nothing can stop a good idea. But the thing is, rather than ask those questions, individually put out the content that you want to see and make it great and build your own audience. And when that content's out there, when they see it, they'll come to you. And sometimes you don't always have to chase people. Just put out cool stuff and make it awesome. And then the awesome stuff, sooner or later, it's going to make it into the right hands. And they're like, hey, we want you to do this here. And you're like, yeah, all right, cool, let's do it. So I think don't worry about what the market's lacking because usually the market is run by people who are not creative, who just want to make money, who look at a thing and say, oh, well, this is successful. Let's do it like this. And you're just copying a concept that's already been done. You're like, be weird, be your weird self, put out your weird stuff and be authentic and just do that. You're gonna be all right. And don't be afraid to work hard. That's it. And that's that. I think that's the most powerful thing you can be to be you and be unique. It's okay to have roots and who your inspirations are, but at the end of the day, you're taking all that into this great stew and you're making this new recipe that is you. You know what I mean? You're taking all your influences, you're boiling it down, and you're like, oh, this and that, and then you create something new and you start doing that and you put that out into the world. It just becomes its own thing. So I think there's more power in doing that. And things are so decentralized now that you don't need a gatekeeper to tell you what's good. If something's missing in the market, create something that the market's missing. Give something to people that they really want that they're not getting, which right now is a good story for a lot of movies. So, you know, um, sadly, but I mean, for every bad movie, there's a lot of great movies that don't really get its due. So, because it's too unique and people are like, they don't know what to do with it. Oh my God, it's too different. So,
It rocks the boat too much. I
but
think
that's the thing. Those things end up winning in the long run. They become fan favorites. So
it's like with Donnie Darko. You ever seen Donnie Darko?
I've never seen that ever.
You've got to watch
Yeah,
it.
early Jake Gyllenhaal when he was a kid. So it's
Well and
like,
all, bad.
yeah,
I never knew he went for the position of Charlie in the Mighty Ducks as well. A very young Jake Gyllenhaal. I didn't know he was a
really.
actor. Mm.
Oh
But
wow.
Donnie Darko, when he does Donnie Darko, it's got Patrick Swayze in it, Jake Gyllenhaal, Seth Rogen's in it.
Really? Wow.
And this film, it kind of bombs. I think was it the Sundance Festival bombs. Releases then in the UK, blows up, becomes cult.
Well, that's the
Great.
thing. You're giving people something they haven't seen. It kind of finds its own audience, even if it bombs at the theater, like Austin Powers bombed at the theater. But in DVD, people actually watch it like, oh, this is really good. Because they didn't know how to market it or do whatever. It's like John Carter on Mars, a Disney movie that bombed. I liked it. And it's kind of a cult favorite now. And people look at it like, oh, that's actually a really good movie. So,
It's
you
the
know,
same with books as well. Lord of the Flies, rejected 20 times.
sometimes you're ahead of your time, and there's nothing wrong with it. You just keep making content. I think that's the thing. That is. Sorry, my wife keeps texting me. She's like,
Hey,
"Come get us drinks."
John Boy, it's been an honor.
Oh,
We
my
could
pleasure,
speak
man.
for days. We could speak for
I
days,
know we've spoken for almost like, gosh, it's one. It's crazy. So,
many
yeah,
hours.
yeah,
But
many
I
hours.
just I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your humility. I want to thank you for your insight, and as well as someone that has been successful in 3 different mediums. Maybe we'll get onto animation another time. But
That would be, yes. You know what? We could do a part 2 on this, to be continued. I could talk about, like, I don't know much about animation outside of the character design end of it, but it's a lot like video games. So it can be a little brutal at times too. Like, I've had some really not so nice notes on my character sheets, and I'm just like, oh, but it's all part of that process. But I can share it with you later. So that's to be continued. We'll
definitely. But listen, to everybody, I hope you've enjoyed it. You know, it's a privilege getting a gentleman like Jonboy Meyers on the podcast. Wonderful asset. Thank you for your time, John. And to everybody, stay great and be seen. Thank you.
You guys.